Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to our lecture series for Chapter 6 in your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Eric Foner. The chapter is entitled The Revolution Within. This first section is called Democratizing Freedom. The focus question for this section is, how did equality become a stronger component of American freedom after the Revolution? Although the conclusion of the American Revolution did not usher in this grand new age of perfect equality, it did establish firmly the dream of equality as an ending goal of this revolutionary process of the great American experiment that many would argue is still underway today. The basic democratic potential within the Americas at the time was very high. There was a wide distribution of property. There was no legally established aristocracy, and there were weak established churches, which set this precedent and underscored this huge potential for the country to evolve into ever-increasing democratic forms. The political debates and the struggles that surrounded the revolution enlarged the scope of freedom and directly challenged traditional power structures, and those challenges would continue unabated throughout the course of American history. The idea of liberty became the standard for which people evaluated homegrown American institutions. And American freedom itself would be forever linked with this idea of equality. And again, an experiment that was unprecedented in world history at the time. And, as I previously mentioned, an experiment that is in many ways still underway in this very moment. It cannot be overstated how radical the notions of equality enshrined in the Declaration of Independence were in their day and time. Prior to that, those Enlightenment ideals that underscored those notions were just that. They were ideals, they were concepts, they were theories that had never been put into any practical form. The notions of equality enshrined in the Declaration opened the door to previously marginalized groups to begin to advance their demands. Women, slaves, free blacks, servants, apprentices. And this was especially true at this time for, of course, free white males. The challenges from the free white male populations to limitations on political participation to property owners began to rapidly increase, especially among the veterans of the American Revolutionary War, many of them who were not property owners themselves, but because of their participation in the war efforts, they were some of the first to begin to demand for more universal male suffrage, to rescind those property qualifications for voting and extend the suffrage more evenly across the board. Now, the elites at the time, and this included most of the founding fathers, were very, very concerned over direct democratic principles. They were concerned about mob rule, or as many would term it, the tyranny of the majority. They viewed that strict democracy was not appropriate for the complexities of the modern world and really only worked on small-scale societies such as the city-state level, if even then. They felt that the mob, the general masses, were not educated enough to make informed, rational decisions when it came to government and political social policy. However, all of these notions of equality that were enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the debates that they spawned increased the participation in the public sphere and slowly over time began to expand democratization further and further out to include more and more of the citizens. Every single state in the Union adopted its own new constitution, either during or immediately after the Revolutionary War. And these state constitutions and the debates that surrounded them sort of served as a laboratory for which the experiment of constitutional republican government would be toyed with and played with. And these debates and experiments would greatly inform the later national constitution as it would develop. All of them agreed, however, that the states should be republics. And the primary thing that underscored that idea was that the authority of government rested on the consent of the governed. There should be no king or hereditary aristocracy. However, there were disagreements over exactly what form that republican government should take. All of the states agreed there should be some form of balanced government, a power-sharing structure between the branches of government, the legislative, the executive, the judicial. Most Americans at the time preferred a strong legislature. They believed the legislature should have the preeminent position amongst those three branches of government. And this was basically a response to their experience with a strong central executive in the form of the British king. And they were very leery of having a strong executive position in their own government, which could usurp, in their minds, the will of the people that was more adequately representative in the legislature itself. One of the initial debates spawned after the Revolution was over the right to vote itself. The requirements for voting and office holding were very contentious at the time. More conservative-minded Americans wanted to keep the property restrictions. They were the ones that were very leery of more direct democracy and questioned the whole idea of democracy and cast it as this sort of mob rule and with the potential to degenerate into the tyranny of the majority. However, the more radical or liberal position wanted to remove those property restrictions and extend the suffrage out to as many people as possible. And of course, still in that radical liberal mind, that still only at this time constituted free white males. Now, the states generally stopped short of granting universal suffrage to free men, except for Vermont, which was the only state that immediately did so within its own state constitutions. The states, by and large, kept at least some minimum property restrictions in place, which was a compromise between that conservative and liberal position there. They were generally lower than they were previously during that colonial era. But because of the widespread distribution of property ownership at the time, the majority of adult white males qualified under most of those state constitutions. And the whole idea of freedom and the right to vote, participate in politics became more and more synonymous with each other as this whole process unfolded. That concludes part 1 of our Chapter 6 lecture series. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.